I'm currently on board a 12-night cruise on one of the oldest and smallest cruise ships in the Norwegian Cruise Line fleet. The ship I'm sailing on is Norwegian Star. She was built in 2001 and she doesn't have any of the features that you'll find on the newest, biggest ships. She doesn't have any high-tech dining, there's no drop slides, no go-karts, but what she does have has changed the way that I think about cruising on older ships. Cruising has changed a lot in the last 24 years, and on this cruise I've seen firsthand how it's changed, for better and for worse. A couple of months ago I cruised on Norwegian's brand new cruise ship Norwegian Aqua, and I had an incredible time doing so many fun things. I wasn't sure if Star would be able to compare, but the itinerary is really what sold me on this cruise. I hoped that I wouldn't find the ship boring or worn down, but for the chance to visit Svalbard and Iceland, I decided it was worth the risk. I often find that older cruise ships have itineraries that are more interesting to me, so if I did enjoy this cruise on this ship, this would open up a lot of other options. I did want to enjoy the cruise part too though, so it couldn't all just be about the itinerary. I flew to Copenhagen in Denmark to embark the ship, and it was one of the easiest embarkations I've ever had anywhere. Seeing the Hulot on the ship was definitely reassuring because there is no doubt that she's the Norwegian Star with all of these stars on her. The Norwegian ships do have some of the best looking hulls in my opinion, and they're always very recognisable from a distance. In total, from walking into the terminal to getting on the ship took 15 minutes. I dropped off my bags, headed through security, and then walked pretty much right to the front of the check-in queue because there just wasn't a queue, there was nobody there. I do have priority boarding because I've cruised with Norwegian so many times before and I have a high loyalty status, but I didn't even need to use it, there was just no line. I wondered if this might be one of the benefits of being on a smaller, older ship with fewer people. I knew that on the bigger, newer ships you do have to book things like shows in the app, but on the smaller ships like Star, you don't have to. Norwegian Star holds a little over 2,300 guests, which might sound like a lot, but compared to the biggest, newest Norwegian ship, Norwegian Encore, she holds almost 4,000. These numbers are without the crew too, so the actual number of people on the ships is much more. Walking on board was the most amazing, exciting feeling. It was such an interesting mix of old and new stylings. This orange wood, for example, looks very 2000s to me, but it was paired with some much more neutral colours, which really made it feel more modern. I do think this part looks like the x-ray of a baby's head though. Let me know if you see that in the comments. I saw this baby everywhere because it was on every staircase, the same pattern repeated. We came out into this atrium and I just love this space so much. It is called the Grand Atrium and I think that is absolutely right. It's split over multiple levels with a restaurant in the middle, seating on the top level and a cafe at the bottom. To think that this area is inside a cruise ship really blows my mind. It'd be very easy to forget that when you're just wandering around in here, if it wasn't for the odd view out the window of course. The ceiling in the middle level I think is really beautiful and the whole space just felt so bright and spacious. My boarding time was 12:30, so I was on board at the perfect time for lunch. I love it when that happens, and the crew had already told us when we boarded that the main dining room, the buffet and Oceans were open for lunch. I decided to head straight to the main dining room. It is always such a treat when you can fit in a main dining room embarkation day lunch. I was hoping that it would be a relaxing way to start our cruise, and it definitely was. We still had our bags with us because our cabins weren't ready yet, and it was just much nicer to sit here rather than carrying them around the buffet. We would also visit the buffet a lot during this cruise though. We were seated off to the side, and the restaurant itself is so elegant, it is so dramatic. It has the most amazing windows at the far end and hundreds of seats. The little touches like the mirrors and the lights, it certainly made it feel very special. It was such a relief and so exciting just to be on board. At this lunch, it really sunk in that I was going to be on board for 12 days. Our cruise was 12 days long and it had 4 sea days. That is much longer than most cruises that I take, but I am glad that it was long because there was a lot to fit in on this cruise. We logged into Norwegian's app, and from this point we were able to see things like the daily schedule and our onboard account. On a cruise, you really don't use money in the same way as you would on land. Everything that you buy, it goes onto your onboard account and then you pay that at the end. I had set up a credit card when I boarded so that that would all be handled automatically. In the main dining room, I noticed that there were these feedback cards on the table, and we would find these all over the ship. I'm sure, like with most reviews, happy people don't really bother to fill them out, so so I did make an effort to fill these out with compliments. I love that Norwegian were actively looking for feedback, and I always think that's the best way to improve something. It was such an easy way to give instant feedback too, so I'm sure that it does make the whole experience better. The hardest part for me was sneakily trying to see the waiter's name without just staring at their name tag. Sometimes I did just ask them, of course, but I tried to be sneaky. The service was fast and we enjoyed all of our food. We'd come back here for lunch again and we'd have dinner here during the cruise. I knew that there was a second main dining room on board too, so I made a note to try that. We also had specialty meal credits to use and I wanted to try as many venues as possible. I knew that there wouldn't be as many options as there were on the big new ships, but it still seemed as though there were plenty of options. Going out and up the stairs, we found a bar at the back called Spice H2O. After picking up a drink here, we decided to head outside. This area out here at the back is adult only, and it was really lovely that it was undercover because the weather was not great at this point. I hope that it would get better as the cruise went on, but Norway, Svalbard and Iceland aren't places that you cruise to if you do want guaranteed sunshine. I did want sunshine, but I knew that I would at least get daylight because the places that we were going to, they have daylight for 4 months at a time. The sun doesn't set. Up on the top deck, we found the helicopter landing pad. This was called the sun deck, which did make me laugh when I recorded this a couple of days later in the cruise in the thickest fog ever. The ship actually had to use its foghorn on a couple of days. You can see in this video here where I literally jumped just trying to record the noise. It was so loud when we were out here. Not that it mattered though, I found the whole thing quite fun. Some people do find it creepy, but personally I love it. I think it's because I took my first cruise when I was 11, so I've always been very used to looking out and just seeing the sea in every single direction. I feel so much safer on cruise ships than on any other form of transport, and I trust the crew to do what they need to do to keep us safe. If that is using the foghorn, I trust them, go ahead. I would not want anything to bump into us. We did see our fair share of sun on this cruise too, and when the sun did come out, we'd spend time playing things like chess. I even went in the basketball court. It wasn't quite the mini golf that I'm used to on Norwegian Aqua, but still, it was good fun. For me, I think it really does depend on the itinerary, how much I want to do on the actual cruise ship. I'd find it very hard to ever be bored when there is a view like this, but I'd also be happy to be here on one of the bigger ships if that was an option. I could just look at this view from my go-kart. Wandering along a little bit, we came to the main pool deck. This is a proper deep swimming pool and it has hot tubs on all the edges. Even though it was very cold on our cruise, people would always be enjoying these. I do get it though, it is like a big warm bubbly bath, and many people would argue it's even nicer when it's cold outside. The main thing that struck me about the outside spaces was that there was just so much space. I loved this tiered area with the seats by the main pool, and there were so many other places where you could sit. I do find that older cruise ships tend to do the basics like space per person right, and it certainly felt like that. I loved watching them loading on the food too. It is mind-blowing to think about the logistics of cruise ships. How they make sure that they don't run out of anything is truly magic. We spent hours and hours and hours on this cruise just wandering around the top decks looking at some incredible sights. We really got to know the crew on this cruise in a way that we wouldn't have on the bigger ships, which is definitely a benefit. The bars would become part of our routine and we'd end up doing the same things at the same time, so we would see the same crew members. For dinner, we decided to head to a Japanese restaurant called Ginza. This is a specialty restaurant, meaning that it does have an extra charge, but most people either buy a dining package or they have some included as part of a booking promotion. The food was fantastic and I had a great view along the promenade deck. This might be my new favourite specialty restaurant, and even though I have cruised with Norwegian a lot, I have never found this one before, so it was great to have a new option. The promenade deck itself was so lovely. We would often walk around here and it went all the way around the ship. I love being able to see the sea in every direction, and it was from here that we did see whales later in the cruise. It was nicely protected from the worst of the wind too, and one lap is around 1/3 of a mile. If you are tracking a walk on something like an Apple Watch, make sure that you track it as an inside walk instead of an outside walk. If you do outside walk, it'll use your location to work out how fast you're going, and it will assume that you have walked the distance that the ship has travelled. It does make for some funny results when I do it by mistake, and sometimes it will congratulate me for walking 12 kilometers in 2 minutes. According to my watch, I have broken all speed walking records. One of my favourite things about Norwegian is that there are no dress codes and no formal nights at all. Shorts are welcome welcome in all of the restaurants for dinner, apart from the one that is called Le Bistro, where you do have to wear trousers or a dress. If you haven't cruised before, you might be wondering why I'm even mentioning that, but it's pretty common on cruises to have to wear trousers or a dress to the main dining rooms for dinner. The first 5 cruises that I ever took were with Norwegian, so I always assumed that's just how the industry was. I was very wrong about that. I did not enjoy finding out that other cruise lines wanted me to wear certain things. No dress codes and no formal nights suited me perfectly. There were lots of theme nights and parties on board, but they weren't ever enforced dress codes. They were just fun. A lot of the time I was wearing a coat and a scarf anyway, so I'm glad that I didn't have to go and get changed for dinner. The Ginza restaurant was used as a quiet zone during the day for people to play cards, and it got used a lot during the sea days in particular. Ginza is located above a bar called Gatsby's, and down here they would have live music most days. I liked how the different bars had very different themes, but they were very distinct and everything fit together very well. I have been on some ships before where it's quite hard to work out the theme, but that was not an issue here. There would be live music in the atrium every single day, and usually multiple times a day. It set such a nice atmosphere on the ship, and I really loved it. The sound travelled up and out, and I'd often find myself humming or singing a song as I just wandered around the ship. Sometimes it would be violins, sometimes a singer, sometimes something else, but it was always good. After dinner, we decided to go to the theatre for the Welcome on Board show. The show was basically a little performance from all of the performers who we could expect to see during the cruise. The production cast shows are usually my favourite, so I was looking forward to those. I knew that they wouldn't have the shows quite like the big ones that I saw on board Norwegian Aqua, but I was hopeful. I don't really need a lot to be entertained. I just like colours and costumes and maybe moving set pieces and songs. In the show, they also introduced a few crew members too, which was nice, and we got to know our cruise director. She was fantastic, and she was such a big part of the cruise experience every day. She gave us daily updates on what was going on around the ship and navigational updates too. All of the crew was so friendly, and I was amazed by just how many crew members there were. They seemed to be everywhere. We had bar service in the theatre, and when we went to the Bliss Lounge next, we just about sat down when the waiter came over to take our order. We never had to wait anywhere to be served, and I chatted to other guests who also mentioned the same thing. The Bliss Lounge is the main lounge on the ship, and this is where most of the entertainment happens. If I ever had any spare time, I would just wander in here and see what was going on. We watched a game show in here this evening, and there was always at least one, but sometimes more game shows in here every day. There were plenty of people that always wanted to take part, so I could watch from a distance, which was perfect. I'd often set up my makeshift office at the back, and I would just enjoy the music from the house band. They did dance classes in here too, which were very popular, and in the evenings there would usually be live music with a sort of theme. It might be 80s themed or glow party themed, but it was always good fun. It was such an interesting mix of guests on this cruise, and I would find out later a little bit more about where everyone was from. The lounge was comfortable, and for me the only real downside was the lack of windows. This is the main lounge on board the ship, but you can't really sit here and look out just because of the location. They do have a few windows that look out on the promenade deck, but if they could just take this lounge and move it up a bit, I would give it 10 out of 10. It was quite surreal actually, because we would go into the lounge, and if we came out at 8 PM, 10 PM, 12 AM, 2 AM, it didn't make any difference. It was always daylight outside because we were sailing so far north, and it just looked as though it was midday, even if it was midnight. That certainly did take some getting used to. For me though, filming this video, it was the absolute dream. I could film shots of the pool deck when no one else was there, and it looked like it was daylight, but it wasn't. I normally have the opposite problem when I'm cruising out of the UK in winter, and it is dark at 4 PM. Luckily for me, the curtains in my cabin were pretty good, and I can sleep even with all the lights on, so I never struggled to sleep. My bed was very comfortable, and I was just so happy and excited to be on board. I felt very content and very snuggly in this bed. We were heading up the coast of Norway, and Norway is one of my favourite countries. On this cruise, we first visited the ports of Kristiansund, Malé and Ålesund. In Kristiansund, we had the most incredible sunshine. It was such a surprise, and I even took my jumper off at one point. When we came back to the ship, we sat by the pool and enjoyed a slice of cake from the poolside grill. This would very quickly become a favourite cake of mine on board, and I had a slice I think every single day, and plenty of cookies too. The grill here was brilliant, the food was hot and fresh, and we really tried to make the most out of the sunshine. We weren't so lucky in Malay, but when we were there, I took an excursion to see a llama farm. We all got pretty wet, but that is the risk that you take in Norway, and I'm from England anyway, so I'm pretty used to it. I think we're waterproof. The sail away was something special, as was our sail away from Ålesund. Together with Alaska, I think Norway has some of the most beautiful sail-ins and sail-outs. For me, this is really what cruising is all about, and I spent so much time looking at this scenery just in disbelief. It looked like another world. I had been to Ålesund before, but when I came in the past, it was covered under a lot of snow, and I had to have the snow spikes on my shoes. This time though, I managed to walk to the top of Mount Oxla, and from here I had the most brilliant view of the ship. If I had looked down on the exact same ship in 2001, the ship would have looked very different, and I would find out clues about her past as the cruise went on. I am such a massive cruise ship nerd, and I don't even want to pretend otherwise. I think it is so fun to look at a ship and to uncover what things used to be like. One thing that has always been the same on Norwegian cruises though, since my very first one when I was 11, is that there's a dining venue on board that is open 24/7. It used to be called the Blue Lagoon on a lot of the ships, but it's called Oceans on here, and it's called the Local on some of the newer ships. I'm not sure if I would describe it as a pub or a bar, but it did feel like a pub. The way that the seats are on different levels is very pub-like, and I did feel very at home in here. The carpet too has such a pub vibe. Oceans goes around both sides of the second level of the atrium, so we could sit here and we could just people watch. On the sides, there were comfortable booths too, and we were always able to get a table whenever we wanted to. You went to this little desk and they scanned your cruise card before seating you. It is included in the cruise fare, but they still scan your cruise card just so that they know where everybody is. Around the ship, there were these screens that showed how full the venues were, and I thought that's very cool. They know that based on who is scanned in. When I was sat at this booth, I had a look at the weather for our upcoming port, and it did make me laugh when it just said that the sun wouldn't rise or set. It is true, but seeing it written down like that was really bizarre. In Oceans, they serve things like burgers, hot dogs, nachos, and chicken wings. The service was always fast, and we were able to get bar service in here too. I did actually have an alcoholic drinks package on this cruise, which isn't something that I ever normally buy, so I did my best to sample a few things. I still ended up going back to my trusty Coke Zero a couple of times, but it was nice to have different options. Sometimes in the evening, we would go to karaoke in the whiskey bar. The bar is right in the middle of one of the main decks, so we'd often just sit here as we were kind of passing through. Norwegian do have some cocktails on tap, and my personal favourite is the Red Bubbles. I didn't have enough of it to sing at karaoke, and I'm not sure that there is any number of drinks that would make me do that, but I do enjoy watching it. After a few days in port, I was looking forward to a sea day. We had 4 of these during the cruise, which given how far we were travelling, I don't think is too bad at all. I was definitely expecting us to have more sea days when I first looked at this original itinerary. I started my sea day by doing some shopping. There was a shop that sold things like perfumes, snacks and watches, and another one that sold more logo merchandise. It was here that I noticed a clue to the ship's past. These souvenirs actually show slides on top of the ship, and they're not there anymore, so I felt like a detective when I found this. The lack of slides on this ship did make sense to me. Older ships tend to be on the longer itineraries, and they do tend to attract less kids. As a result, the majority of onboard spaces on this ship are designed for adults. They do still have kids clubs on board this cruise, of course, but I only really saw a handful of kids. As well as the shops, there was a photography studio, and in here I bought some binoculars with my onboard credit. I was really hoping to see a whale during this cruise, and I thought that these might help me with that mission. I'd heard that Iceland was my best bet. For lunch, we decided to head to the buffet, which was up on deck 12. There were plenty of seats, and I really loved how they had crew on the doorway spraying sanitizer as the guests walked in. Onto their hands, of course, not just generally into the air. It makes me so happy to see that this is happening, and the ship was spotless in every single way. I never saw any rubbish anywhere, and I constantly saw the crew cleaning. It would never be very long from me putting down an empty cup to a crew member swooping it away and asking me if I wanted a new one. I never saw any food in the corridors or anything that looked dirty. That was the same on the newer Norwegian ships, of course, but I really noticed it here. Perhaps just because you kind of expect older ships to feel more run down, but it really didn't. I didn't notice any damage anywhere, and I never saw anything that was broken or leaking. Norwegian must have spent a lot of money on this ship to keep it up to this standard. All of the carpets and the chairs and everything like that are new, and they must have changed many times in the last 24 years. It is crazy to think that 2001 was 24 years ago, but it was, unless you're watching this in the future, and then it's even more. We ate in the buffet every day during our cruise at some point, and we were always able to find food that we liked. The layout was a little bit strange because there wasn't a lot of space actually by the food, but for me, these fruit carvings, that made up for it. They were so cute. I think that we should call this guy Octobrock because he's an octopus and he's sitting on broccoli. Let me know what you think about that. Let me know if you're team Octobrock or team not Octobrock. The buffet did get busy at peak times, the same way as it does on every cruise, but we were always able to find a seat in here. Sometimes the food would just be open on one side, so there would be lots of seats left on the other side. Something very, very strange happened to me next, and that is that I won $61 in the casino. I normally always lose. That is very rare for me. I usually gamble $10 every cruise that I take, and I'm pretty content to just lose that and move on. This time though, I took my winnings and I left. I never went in the casino again after that. I was happy and I was done. On cruises, the casino and the shops are only open when the ship is at sea, so I do like to make the most out of those things on a sea day. Other popular sea day activities are things like going to the spa or perhaps going to the gym. I didn't go near the gym on this cruise, I'm afraid, so I can't show you that, but I can show you what these stairs are like, and I walked up and down these every single day. There are lifts, of course, but I do prefer to leave those for people who need them, and it does become a bit of a challenge for me. One day on this cruise, I walked up over 100 flights of stairs. We were never too far from anything, and 12 days on board was fantastic because I did actually learn my way around. Normally I just get to day 7, finally, I'm starting to work it out, and then I get off the cruise. All cruise ships do have deck plans on the cruise line's website, and they're very helpful for looking at before a cruise to get a head start on learning your way around. Sea days are really about recharging for me, ready for the next port day, and to do that you need to eat. We had great specialty meals in La Cucina and Cagney's Steakhouse. In Cagney's, the thing that you have got to do is you have got to get the 7-layer chocolate cake. It is absolutely huge, so we did share it, but you could take it back to your cabin if you couldn't finish a portion. I have done that in specialty restaurants before with things like pizza, and the crew don't mind. They already have the room service coverings there. It's ready to go. In the UK, I've never been offered or asked for a doggy bag like that, but Norwegian are an American company, and as far as I can tell, that is a normal thing to do there, and it's a totally normal thing to do on a cruise. Reducing food waste, that's always a good thing. When we visited Honningsvåg, we went to North Cape, and this is the furthest north place in the furthest north city in the whole of Europe. I've made a full video about the excursions for the Norwegian Cruise Line YouTube channel, so make sure that you check that out after this. You do not want to miss my coal mine experience. I've been cruising with Norwegian since I was 11, and because of that, I do have a pretty good loyalty status with Norwegian. I just turned Sapphire, and my favourite perk by far is a free bag of laundry. I also get a couple of specialty meals and discounts on various things. I filled my free bag of laundry and I squashed my socks down into every single corner because I wanted to make the most out of it. Having a bag show back up like this to your cabin with everything nicely folded, it is amazing. Having been in the more traditional grand main dining room, we decided to try out the second main dining room for dinner next. The bread was so good, and I had this dish which is basically cheese on cheesy pasta. That is not the real name, of course, but that's basically what it is, and I loved it. There are absolutely no fixed dining times on Norwegian at all. You just show up at the main dining room when you would like to eat, and there's no table sharing or anything scary like that. If you do have to wait, they will give you a buzzer, and you can go and sit in a bar somewhere and have a drink until it starts to vibrate. I usually eat as early as possible, so I never had to wait for dinner at all, and I only had to wait for lunch once on a sea day, which is when it is the most popular. Aqua is a much more modern restaurant in terms of the actual design, and it was busier and noisier than the bigger dining room. The food in here was good, the service was always perfect, and these piles of menus were absolutely massive. I'm not sure how many this restaurant seats, but it is seriously impressive. The menus were available in different languages too. I was very happy to see a few allergens were marked on the menu like gluten-free, and I also noticed that in the buffet, which I thought was great. During our 12-day cruise, we had 2 production cast performances in the theatre. I definitely would have liked more, but that is personal preference. I've always liked the all singing, all dancing shows, and that is your Britishism of the week. If something is all singing, all dancing, it just means that it has all of the features. It doesn't have to be anything to do with singing or dancing. You can have a all singing, all dancing toaster, an all singing, all dancing pizza oven. If something has a lot of features, that's what we call it. Towards the end of the cruise, they did have one show where they brought out staff members to represent different parts of the cruise. So they would have a few people from housekeeping, a few bartenders, for example. This is something I remember a lot from my past Norwegian cruises, and I just love it. It makes you realize how many people work on the ship, and seeing someone you recognize up there on the stage, I just think it's so cool. Finding out what countries they're from too, that's always very interesting to me. I did love how they even had the washy hand sanitizing crew dancing on the stage. I think to me that shows how much they value cleanliness, and they're happy to make a point out of that, which is great. Up until this point, we had been pretty lucky with the weather, but I was fully prepared for things to get rough given the location of this cruise. At one point, things did get slightly rocky and the sick bags did appear on the stairs. This always makes me think, oh no, here we go again, but I'm very happy to report that the seas never got rough at all. In fact, on this cruise, I had some of the calmest seas that I've ever seen anywhere. It was like a pond. As the cruise went on, I started to notice odd signs around in Chinese, which I thought was interesting, and sometimes some in Spanish too. Turns out we had a lot of Chinese tour groups on this cruise, followed in passenger numbers by people from the USA, the UK, Germany, and Canada. I love a mix of guests, and I think that this is my ideal situation on a cruise. I always find that it makes things so much more interesting, and everyone seems a bit more spread out because the interests of the guests are just more varied. We had a mix of ages on this cruise too, but there weren't many children or young families. That's probably because we were cruising during term time, and it's a bit of a quirky itinerary that started in one place and ended in another. Those are just a bit more tricky logistically. Great for me though, because we covered a lot of ground and I got to go to places that I've never been to before. Svalbard might be the most amazing place that I've ever been on a cruise. It is so remote that it is forbidden to die or give birth on the island. This video will show you next what I got up to in the ports, and this is really the reason that I booked this cruise to begin with. This video is over on the Norwegian Cruise Line YouTube channel, so please do let them know that I sent you there. Thank you so much to everyone who did that on my last Norwegian Cruise Line video. It's because of you that I get to go to these places and experience these things, and I can never thank you enough. See you there in a minute.